know what your go-to is going to be and know exactly where you're taking someone when you walk them to the other things you're going to pair with them. So, as a recap of what we've done so far as product categories, we've talked about the dry whole mussels, and we've talked about the cooked whole mussel. We've had a chance to see them. Dry whole mussel is going to be your bresaola, your prosciutto, your coppa. Those are going to be the most varying products in your case, most likely, because since it is a whole mussel and every piece is going to vary, sometimes pretty drastically. I mean, I've seen coppa that's half this size by the time it's dried. You'll sometimes see coppa that's almost double in diameter. Not always is it long and slender, looking like this. So it is going to vary from piece to piece, and sometimes people will ask you, like, oh, you're just pulling this one out to work with it. The last time I saw that, it looked very different. Maybe that's not actually what I wanted. So you're going to have to explain to people, oh no, there's actually a fair amount of variance because it is a whole mussel cut. And you can talk about the artisan nature of this whole mussel cut. It's not something that's ground, fermented, standardized process. It's a true whole mussel cut of meat. Typically, these types of meat will come at a higher price point, the bresaola, the coppa, the prosciutto, and that's why it's not something that's ground and mixed with fat. It's the whole mussel, all lean. This is also a really popular option for your Whole30 paleo people, specifically like prosciutto, that's just pork and sea salt, where there's no sugars. We can talk about sugars and residual and why you see it. When you do see it on a nutrition table from Creminelli, you'll see that sugars is listed, and then you'll see that it says 0. Anybody know why that is already?
Naturally occurring within practically everything.
So they are added afterwards, and there is sugar that goes into the product. But then, according to the nutrition table, it says there are 0 grams, no residual sugar. Why is that?
Because the culture is consumed.
Yes, that is a fact. So sugar is bacteria food. So in those first 48 hours during the drying fermentation, that kickstart, the make it or break it phrase we talked about, what's happening is the bacteria, food-safe bacteria is consuming the sugar, using it as food. The breakdown of sugar, or glycolysis for all of you science majors, effervesces heat, and that process is actually what's turning raw meat into a food-safe product. So by the time the salami is finished aging, there is no residual sugar left at all. The bacteria has eaten it all and then died off. So the end result, 0 sugar. However, if you're talking to someone who's paleo, Whole30, typically, even if the nutrition label says 0, they won't eat it if it says sugars in the ingredient list. In this particular case, that would be the equivalent of putting grass on your ground beef label because the cow had to eat it at some point. So, again, no residual sugar. The people who are really involved in the Whole30, like the more sciencey educated ones, they will actually go to salami all the time because they know there's no residual sugar. But the training materials actually indicate don't eat anything with sugar in the ingredient list because it's easier than explaining like, well, sometimes it's actually okay, and sometimes it's not. And, so if you do get somebody who's kind of on that trend, that paleo Whole30, it's really easy to go straight to something like prosciutto or bresaola that's literally just lean, salt, done. No sugar, no nothing. For those that are more kind of involved in the science and educated about it, they'll be good options for any sort of cured meat product because there is no residual sugar left over based on the process itself. So, whole mussel cuts. Any questions about the whole mussel dried products, what those are, anything on that list that is unfamiliar? The one reason that I want you to really know what they are, even if it's not in your case, is because if somebody comes up looking for something, I don't want you to not know what it is. If you don't have it, I want you to say, oh no, we actually don't have guanciale, but we have pancetta from this producer. It's amazing, would you like to try it? Why would you sub guanciale for pancetta versus guanciale for prosciutto? Because it's the most similar in flavor profile, it's the most similar in application. So I'd like you to be as familiar as possible. So if there is anything on this list that you don't recognize, let's talk through it or Google it after. And then for the sake of having a reference guide, I know you have Siri, you have Cheryl, you have support, but I pretty much live and die by email. I spend a lot of time on a plane and it really gets me through the plane ride. So if you ever have a question or something that pops up, just shoot me an email to me. I'm just ryan@creminelli.com, RYAN@creminelli. Shoot me a question, whether it's your question, the guest question, whatever it is, and I'll answer it for you. Or I'll ask Cristiano. I have a resource at my disposal that's hundreds of years in the making. So, whole muscle dried, whole muscle cooked. We went through those. Any questions about those? Porchetta, koto, why we don't call it a ham. We're all comfortable, everybody feels comfortable to slice it, how it goes in the slicer, taking the skin off, leaving the fat on, how that works.
What is the capicola and
Okay.
why don't we carry it?
You kind of do. So if you were in Italy, like our friend here, if you were in Italy, what you would actually see is capicolo. That's the traditional deli item for an Italian deli. It's CAPOCOLLO. And capicolo is a lot like prosciutto, where you have prosciutto two different ways. You have prosciutto crudo, the dry aged leg. You have prosciutto cotto, the cooked whole muscle ham. You have capicolo crudo and capicolo cotto as well. Creminelli has, to kind of separate that and explain to a customer, created two different product names. Ours is capicola, which is a cooked pork shoulder, whole muscle cut, and our copa is the dry whole muscle cut. If somebody came in looking for capicolo and asked you for that, you would ask them, are you looking for an aged product or a cooked product? If they were looking for cooked, that would be the capicola style. If they're looking for the aged, like a salami style product, they're looking for the copa. But capicolo just refers to that actual shoulder, the pork, what's oftentimes called the butt, CT butt. It's that whole muscle cut of meat. Okay, so now we're gonna move over to ground meat that is cooked. This is probably the smallest category of the Italian salumi spectrum, but it does feature some of the die-hard fans. So, mortadella is the original, what? Bologna. So had you grown up in Italy as a child, instead of eating Oscar Mayer with that nasty red wax thing around it, you would have gotten mortadella, and it's a shame we all didn't get that experience, right? So mortadella is, it is a product that we make. It's a product that a lot of producers make, and it varies from region to region, like a lot of Italian meats. Ours specifically does not feature pistachios, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, that's indicative of some of the regions in the north, specifically where Cristiano comes from, to not include pistachios. It also, too, removes a major allergen from our factory. We don't have to bring nuts in. It also means that between slicing it, you don't have to do a major deep clean. That's not something that always happens, unfortunately, but it is something that should happen if you're working with allergens. So you should never be slicing cheese and meat on the same slicer. You should never be slicing nuts and naan right after one another without a deep clean. So mortadella, the original Italian bologna, where does it get its name? Anyone know? Like most things in Italy, it's actually a little town, little village. So it's in the center east side of Italy, and it's actually a town. This town is known, rather than drying salami with fennel, like Tuscany, or drying salami with pepper, like Calabria, they created this cooked emulsified product, most often with dairy and milk powder, which ours also doesn't have to avoid the allergen again. They created this cooked product in a bladder instead of a casing, a true natural casing. So they wrap it in a bladder, slow cook it, almost like a prosciutto cotto, and created mortadella, and that's what made them distinct and unique from other regions producing types of deli meat. And so that was what it was common in their area, and then it became wildly popular throughout the world, and now we see mortadella in almost every deli case across the country. I'm not gonna lie to you, it's not personally my favorite. But it is one of Cristiano's very favorites, and this is another thing where if you get somebody who's European in your store, this is gonna be an easy go-to item to make a sale. So you always wanna make sure if you have people visiting from France, Italy, whichever selection of mortadella you have, I would lead with that if you're gonna sample things out to try and get them to buy something. You guys have a masterfully curated selection of products, and I don't know if you've had a chance to go shop your competitors, but that is a fact. Like the Hayden store, the Woodinville store, carries a better selection of product than some major urban city centers. The curation of product that you have in your store would stand up against anything you'd walk down the street and find in Italy, New York, Los Angeles. It's a masterful selection. So you'll be able to offer some high quality products and make some sales, especially if somebody has that kind of traditional European taste palette. Mortadella, cotechino. Cotechino is probably going to be outside of mortadella in this particular category. Outside of mortadella, cotechino will probably be the most requested item. I doubt that you'll have it. It's something that we used to make in very small batches, mostly for employees. It's a traditional holiday meal. So you it's a cooked sausage. You cook it up and it would be served with lentils, and that's kind of a New Year's traditional meal. It's actually fairly difficult to produce, and then because it's cooked, it has a shorter shelf life. So it creates kind of and it also doesn't have the notoriety like a mortadella or a porchetta. So the overall like logistics of making it and getting it places is difficult. We have done it in years past, and if you happen to, for whatever reason, create a kind of customer base up here, we can do it for you. So if somebody brings it up, let us know. We'll talk to Cheryl Ann. Maybe we do some sort of exclusive run for you guys. We've done that before. And it's something that's on the table, but it's not something that you'll probably hear a lot of. Most of the other things in this arena you also won't ever get asked for. Zampone is actually not legal to produce here. The USDA has a strict regulation on heads and hooves. So where you would run through deli in Rome, if you would run through a deli in Rome, they would actually literally be selling the full head. The salami di testa, the head cheese, head attached. That's not uncommon. You also see hair and skin on prosciutto legs hanging and aging in the shop. So it's a little bit different, zampone being the actual hoof of the animal still attached. And that's not something that we as American producers can send out into the marketplace. Somebody ever asks for it, you know what it is, but you won't see it in your set or competing sets unless that changes from the USDA.